All right, so Final Fantasy VII in a nutshell. Excellent game. Probably one of the best Final Fantasies alongside 4. And 6 was pretty good too. Had the best villain, in my opinion. And I made some really good arguments to why that is. I know that's never going to be mainstream thought, probably, though the debate is split very even for a good reason. Because there are a lot of rational arguments against Sephiroth. There's a lot of them, and they're good arguments. So, anyway, moving along. Final Fantasy VIII. Okay, there are people that like this game. Final Fantasy VIII was shit. Visually and musically, the quality improved. Oh yeah, I think visually they did really well because they went from sprites to full size in and out of battle. They did a lot of new things visually. The pacing of the game was pretty poor. I wasn't a big fan of the game mechanics because I picked up on it really quick. A friend come up to me, how do you beat Final Fantasy VIII? Simple. You take Quetzalcoatl, you learn the card ability, and you play Tetra Magic till your asshole blows out, and you have so much great magic that you can literally just pop Meltdown on one character, Fire 3 on another, and Ice 3 on another stat. Max all their stats out with the highest powerful spells in the game, you're set. Flare, put a bunch of flares on there. You can do that before the end of Disc 1? Yeah, you can. And I say that's fucking stupid. I'm sorry, I didn't want to play Final Fantasy VIII to play a card game. And now you don't have to do that. And the creatures level up with you, which is kind of dumb. I didn't like that aspect at all. So the least battles you fought, the better off you were. So what did you do? You took Quetzalcoatl, learned the card ability, you got Diablos, and you learned the avoid random battle. And you're set. Okay? You didn't have to do much in that game to beat it from that juncture and point on, except play a lot of the card game. I did enjoy the card game. That's the one thing that there's two things that came out of Final Fantasy VIII that were actually good. The music and the graphics were improvement, but that's not what I'm going to talk about. The card game. I liked the card game. For about the first 6 hours I played it. Not consistently or back to back, but as I progressed through the game, I played overall, by the end of the first disc, I want to say I did about 6 hours of gameplay. All the card games that I did, I liked, but I didn't like the rules constantly changing. That was annoying and just drove me up the fucking wall. I thought it was stupid. Leave the rules the way they were and just let it be what it needs to be. And Laguna. I liked Laguna's story arc. I actually liked it. I wanted to play that game. I wanted there to be a 4-disc game about him. And only him and his 2 buddies. You didn't need 6 boring, shitty characters that had no personality traits that were redeemable. You had 3 good characters who had great personality traits that were redeemable. Laguna is amazing as a character. He was the character I wanted to play with. Kyros was, the kind of the level-headed, character. And Ward, until he lost his tongue, and then until he lost his voice, rather. I then kind of started losing interest. But even Ward, I would have liked to see more of that. They could have made a game strictly about those 3 idiots. And and I do call them idiots because they are kind of silly, and that was the kind of game I wanted to play. That story arc by itself was the right thing to do. It made me interested, and this is how did I get through the game? I wanted to see more of the backstory of those 3, and hoping that the further I got through the game, the more they would reappear in the story, and then obviously it played out the way it did, and Julia, but. Good night, Julia, or what is it? Julia, eyes on me, whatever. Yeah, where was that story the whole game? Instead, we got Squall, who I just wanted to get on my knees in front of Squall, look up at him with innocent eyes as he looked down at me, take my fist and just repeatedly and viciously continue to punch him in the testicles. Because I didn't really believe he had any. Squall is not the personification of a good protagonist. Again, it's kind of like again, like where Sephiroth really nailed a few good villainous traits, but fucked up a whole bunch. Squall didn't nail any of the protagonist traits except for maybe one. And I'm sorry, you can't have a protagonist that acts like that and to be liked. You just don't. And Sephiroth was shit, and we all know it. And the Empress was a pretty shitty villain too. So we're now running into these characters that are just mediocre across the board at best. At best, you know, Zell was colorful, I guess, in some places. Selphie is someone I like. This chick I used to know who would snort coke before going to a rave. That's pretty much Selphie to me. Renoa, very bland. Quistis, eye candy for a lot of people. Irving, totally useless in story. And Squall, oh god, oh my god, he's not a good protagonist. He's not. I'm sure he appeals to some people, as every character will appeal to every person out there. I guarantee it. Okay? That's like watching nostalgia critics, old versus new. You'll like the new over the old for various reasons, and some of those reasons is because there are a group of people that fucking appeals to. Was Squall a good decision? Fuck no. And here's the problem. Was they backed off on the emo shit. They really did in following Final Fantasy games. But they always tried to make it fit back into Cloud's emotional distraught and persona. And once you've made it once, you'll never be able to emulate it. And they never did. They tried. They really tried. And they never were able to emulate this again. And most of us know that they tried to do it in Final Fantasy 13 to some extent. And we'll get to that when we fucking get to that. But yeah, Squall can burn in a fire, and he really ruined that game outright. I almost want to say that if there was a more colorful, interesting lead, like Laguna and Kyros and Ward, if they were probably in the game with maybe Zell and Quizdiz and Renoa as maybe the love interest, those characters were maybe kind of bland, but they could work off of Kyros, Ward, and Laguna and maybe make them more interesting. That's what bugged me about that game. The man with the machine gun carried way more weight and lead bullets than Leon Squall did with his brooding, his horrible brooding. It was like watching a really bad teen vampire TV series with that one character who's like, woe is me, I don't expect anything good to ever happen. I can't do it on my own. And I will one of these days do a individual breakdown of every Final Fantasy game separately in like a little 30-minute talk and squawk kind of my opinions on them on specifics. I'm not going to get into any more specifics on Final Fantasy VIII. You can skip that one. You really can. You really can, and you ain't gonna miss out on much. And the PlayStation console had way better games to play than Final Fantasy VIII. Okay, what came out during Final Fantasy VIII period? Xenogears, which was a significantly better game, and it wasn't even mostly in 3D. It was mostly in 2D. The battles were kind of in 3D mixed with 2D. I mean, and that was a better game. The Lunar remakes, far significant over that. Even, in all honesty, this is going to sound a little bad. This is going to sound pretty bad. Legaia was a better game than Final Fantasy VIII. Visually, it was nowhere near it, but, I mean, that story, when I judge a video game, I judge it on its story, and then I judge it on its gameplay. And then I judge it on its looks and its music. I'll play a shitty-looking game with shitty sound effects and graphics, but if it has a great story, I'm going to play the shit out of it because that's why I play RPGs. You know, I don't play them for the look or what their graphics are because graphics mean shit. The graphics are just based on who throws the most money at it or has the most money to throw at it. You'll have great graphics. And that was what we started noticing. Okay, that's why there was never a sequel to Legend of Dragoon. Though that studio threw so much fucking money at that game, and because it chose to come out alongside Final Fantasy VIII, and everybody thought it was going to be Final Fantasy VII, but cooler. Yeah, that game didn't get very far. It's not. It's pretty good until about halfway through, and then it kind of dredges on. So, all fairness, but you know what? Those characters were far better than what we got out of Final Fantasy VIII. Far better. Legend of Dragoon is a better game in most aspects than Final Fantasy VIII. Easily, I can say that with confidence. And Enix was pumping out Valkyrie Profile, and you can see where I'm going with this. There were so many other better RPGs to play than Final Fantasy VIII. Final Fantasy IX. Finally, Final Fantasy IX. They tried to redeem themselves. This was, I think, Hironobu Sakaguchi saying, look, 7 was successful. I really didn't want to go the route that I did with 8, but in all honesty, I think he does make those comments. He was kind of pushed by the company to make that game because they figured that that's what people wanted. They wanted more emotionally distraught characters. They wanted more technology-driven, more realistic life style essences to it. You know, they wanted to make more Midgars, which were all the seed built, facilities, the towns with trains as opposed to towns that still had horses or were more medievalish in how they were laid out. Final Fantasy IX, yes, was a look back on everything else. Now, here's what's funny. Final Fantasy IX did better than 8 in the grand scheme of things. Quality, as far as making money and whatever, you can argue that whatever you want, but after what we had with Final Fantasy VIII, there were people who openly wrote on message boards they weren't going to go out and buy Final Fantasy IX right away. That's how concerned they were with Final Fantasy in general, and I don't blame them. I mean, I was hesitant. After playing games like Grandia and playing, Valkyrie Profile, I guess, and playing Xenogears, Legaia. I played the Lunar remakes. I think I already mentioned that. Or Grandia. And I played Parasite Eve. These RPG games were just coming out of people's asses like a dude who ate a brick of cheese and then drank half a gallon of milk of magnesia. They were just coming out of the woodworks, and they were hit and miss. Some were really, really good. Some were okay. Some were shit. But very few of them were absolute shit. I mean, Breath of Fire 3 and 4 were amazing. They were, oh my god. If you haven't played those, you're a fucking douchebag, and you should play them immediately. They're great games. The Suikoden's 1 and 2. 2 being arguably a competitor for Best RPG on the PlayStation. I hate to say it, it was. And that fucking game had 102 characters. Holy fucking dog shits, Batman. That's a lot of characters. So, Final Fantasy IX. They fixed a lot of the problems. Again, the ultimate middle ground. They took what they had from kind of the old Final Fantasies of ye olden times, and they kind of added it with a couple of aspects from Final Fantasy VII. They added the card game and what they felt was an improved version of the card game, which I didn't think it was improved. From Final Fantasy VIII to Final Fantasy IX, which was Tetramaster, and there you go. I don't like Kuja that much. Kuja's a pretty good villain. We'll start with the villain first. Kuja's a pretty good villain, but he was trying to be another Kefka without the clown outfit. They left that to Brine, Queen Braun, or whatever her fucking name is. And, Kuja's a decent villain. You can get by with him. He's definitely an upgrade from Sephiroth and the fucking Empress, or Sorceress. Okay? That's a total fuck upgrade. I mean, shit! Definitely not a Golbez, and even definitely not an Exodus. And at least Exodus had other villains around him, like Gilgamesh, who kind of picked up some of the slack. Queen Braun does not pick up any slack. She's a fucking giant whale. And every time I see her, I vomit a little bit in my mouth. She's a good villain. I mean, she's not a great villain. She's a very cliche villain at this point of video games. But she wasn't necessarily a bad villain. and you kind of felt sorry for her when you find out what really is going on between her and Garnet and all that. The main cast, Zidane's pretty cool. He's all right. A bit more of the Robin Hood-esque kind of character, but lacking all of the good Robin Hood traits. But he's a much more tolerable protagonist, and definitely a step up from Squall / Leon, and a little bit of a step up than Cloud. But he's definitely not a Locke. He's definitely not a Cecil by any means. But he's a decent protagonist that I can get behind. And at least in that story, it worked. It worked really well to have that character there. Garnet was also, again, it worked, but very cliche. Okay, I already foresaw that fucking story. Aiko, if I'm pronouncing that right, or whatever her name is, the other summoner girl, which I don't really care for. I didn't really care for her, though she's got her moments, and they're cool. Quina is obviously Quina. It's the Kate Sith of the game, but very useful character as opposed to Kate Sith being completely useless. Armorant, say what you will, Armorant is crap. I don't know. I'm kind of... They tried to reestablish Shadow, I guess, with him. Or that mentality. And, yeah, I'm comparing it to Final Fantasy VI because that's what they were trying to emulate along with Final Fantasy IV. But they didn't really nail the characteristics to the letter like 4 did. And there's more characters so that you can rotate in and out. So it's more like Final Fantasy VI in that regard. And that's kind of what Armorant was to me. He was a mixture of Sabine and Shadow. Even personality-wise, he was closer to Shadow. And in all honesty, Shadow played Shadow better. Who else is in there? What is it, Frisia? Or Freya? I had mixed feelings about. I never really felt attached to her, though some people really did. And if you like her, that's fine. She's a decent character too. Steiner is okay. He's okay. Vivi's a good character. Here's the thing. They were good characters. All of them were decent characters. Even what's her name, Aiko or whatever the fuck it was. They're all decent characters. But there are other Final Fantasy characters that did it better. But they were good. They were good. I liked them. The story was going in the right direction. The last boss of the game, fuck that. That was stupid, and that was worse than the Zeramus. Zeramus, though that happened, Zeramus was a cool instigating fight that you knew of going in. You knew about him before you got to him, and he was referenced throughout the game. A lot more than what's his name? I forget the last boss's name. Not Kuja. It wasn't Kuja. It was that other villain, that other boss. And that was like, I sat there and I beat Kuja. I get to this boss and I'm like, I don't even know what you are and I don't even like you because I know nothing about you. And yeah, that's kind of a buzzkill. So I covered some things I didn't like. The music, again, an improvement. Graphics, kind of an improvement, a weird improvement, but it was an improvement. They changed their design to a more animated, cartoonish format, which I didn't really like. Personally, I kind of wish it wasn't really like that, but it worked. There's nothing wrong with it. So, what does that mean? What is Final Fantasy IX? I liked it. It was a good game. It wasn't great. It wasn't the greatest Final Fantasy of all time, but it did so many things right. It did a lot of things right, but it didn't do anything amazing. Flat out didn't do anything amazing. I liked how they went back to the job system because that gave characters a more unique feel to them. You were not just attached to them as personalities, but you were attached to them because they filled roles closer visually and physically as you played the game. They filled certain roles. And their personalities were pretty good. They weren't, like I said, they weren't amazing, but they were good. And I liked the gameplay. I liked that wearing gear, you learned abilities. I did like that. And sometimes you had to wear a piece of weak gear just to learn an ability you missed out on. that wasn't that big of a deal. And grinding in that game was not needed really that much because of the system they had in place. The story wasn't really bad, but it necessarily wasn't the greatest. But it wasn't bad. It was far more tolerable than 8, and I think that could also be said because when you go from 8 to 9, 9 is a significant improvement in comparison to 8. Though I didn't like the card game in 9 as much as I liked it in 8. So I will say that. So, to me, that's a big deal. They did it better. They did that one a lot better. And it was much more enjoyable. Like I said, the villain is kind of mediocre. Half of the cast is kind of mediocre, but they're not bad. There's not really any overly bad qualities, except maybe Quina. But she's kind of like a Kate Sith. And not really... She's an optional character. You don't ever have to get her in the game. So, yeah. Though Kate Sith is a character you have to have in the game. But, you know... Whatever. She's not detrimental to the story. She doesn't input that much, but whatever. She's there. And like I said, the story was pretty cool. And there were parts of the story where, like, Garland was there. And I saw Garland in I Am a Sky. And I just was like, whoa. Final Fantasy 1. Are they trying to kind of... Are they going to finally... bring all the different Final Fantasies together? Of course not. There's no relevance from the Garland of Final Fantasy 1 to Final Fantasy 9. And you think there is... I mean, play the Japanese translated version and you'll see that there... I don't remember them making a reference to it in the Japanese version. So I still stand by saying there really isn't. But it was cool to see Garland. It was cool to see that portrayal. And one of the things I wish they did with Final Fantasies 1 and 2, 4, 5, and 6 is to bring them to the three-dimensional world AAA title quality. If they actually did that, Square Enix would not be so close to bankrupt ever again. They would not ever go near bankrupt. And then obviously, if they did it to 7, without dicking around with it too much, they'd make a lot of money again. But, they're not going to do it anytime soon. I think there's a lot of legal issues involved between them and Hironobu Sakaguchi and Nobuo Uematsu and the people at Mistwalker who used to work for Square Enix. There's been talk about these are reasons why they don't do it. Because Hironobu Sakaguchi still, I think, owns some rights to that game. Somebody confirmed that for me because I read that in Kotaku. One of these Japanese gaming magazines that Yoshi and I would read together. And he kind of said, well, it sounds like there's a legal problem when Hironobu Sakaguchi and some of the other people at Square Enix left. They still owned a few rights to those games that they can't make it. I don't know if that's true. It's speculation, but whatever. Is 9 a good game? Yeah, it's a good game. It's worth any amount of money that you need to buy it. It should be a staple in your collection, and it will get played more than once, maybe every year. If you are like me and pull out all kinds of RPGs